Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. As always, I'm your foul player. Thank you for stepping into the foul playland. I wanted to make a short Met video regarding something I was saying early in the year, and people were saying that I was nuts when it came to my team, Los Mets of New York City. But one of the things that I was kind of pushing for was that the Mets don't re-sign Jacob DeGrom. As we all know, Jacob DeGrom had his last arbitration year this past year, which he came to the arbitration number of 17 million, and the Mets had one more year of Jacob DeGrom services before they had to re-sign him or let him go in free agency. The Mets re-signed him to a $138 million contract for 5 years. I was saying that the Mets should have gone in to the rest of this year with Jacob DeGrom and see how not only he performed, but how the team performed, and try to re-sign him at the end of that, or trade him in the middle of the year if he performed well. The reason I thought that that was a good idea was because you would be signing DeGrom at a when he is 1 year older. I mean, that could only help. Two, and more importantly, was that if in the event that the Mets didn't perform well, or that the team didn't do well, that they had the option of trading DeGrom for a half a year of his service to a team that's contending, a la the i.e. the Yankees would have been a perfect candidate. When you're trading one of the league's best pitchers who just came off a Cy Young year the year before, and you trade him to a team that's really contending. I was also opposed to DeGrom re-signing or re-signing DeGrom at that point, because it's like a perfect time of like when not to sign him. He just finished having this dominant year. He's only going to sign for a premium because he's a premium pitcher. But the Mets did. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, in essence, I think they could still trade him. I don't know if he has a no trade clause, but it's just more stupidity from the Mets, to be frank. Because at this stage, you could almost make a pretty good guarantee that one, if not both, of Noah Syndergaard, or maybe even Steven Matz, Jason Vargas is definitely going to go. I mean, because he's pitching decent, thank God. And I think the Mets would just be happy to, recoup some money from his contract. But the Mets were a shitty team last year, to be frank. When you have a shitty team, you don't try to put a bow tie on it and run the same team out with a few ancillary pieces and think you're gonna go for a championship or even the playoffs. I thought that the Mets should have seen where the chips fell with DeGrom, like this year, try to compete with him, like, all while not re-signing him. And if they were going to add anything, they should have added bullpen arms, because you could always trade bullpen pieces. Even Edwin Diaz, like our closing pitcher, who's like kind of stinking it up at the moment. If they were to trade him like right now, they could probably get something for Edwin Diaz, because people always need bullpen arms. There was a lot of good bullpen arms that were out there in free agency this year. Some of which are performing really well. But the Mets chose to make a terrible trade for Robinson Cano, with the excuse being that they were also getting Edwin Diaz as part of that package. But now they're hampered with one of the worst players in the league right now, who also doesn't hustle, in Robinson Cano. And even though Edwin Diaz was one of the best closers in the league when we acquired him, he's having a really shitty performances this year. because I mean we're a shitty team. Like I mean the Mets are no good. Um, you know, but a lot of people deal from a an area of emotion with New York teams in general. I mean, I'm not gonna say just Met fans, but New York teams in general. I mean, like I would listen to WFAN and ESPN radio, and a lot of people would call bitching that the Mets needed to re-sign DeGrom, and like that he was the person to build with. I can't say that I'm gonna build a house with a couple bags of sand and a water hose. You build or you begin to build when you have a foundation set. The Mets didn't have a foundation set. They had a couple of overworked pitchers, with questionable questionable track records like Syndergaard, um, like Steven Matz, and then they were still hampered with Jason Vargas, who was actually pretty shitty last year, and he's playing okay this year. But you didn't know what you were gonna get with Vargas, and you knew for sure that he was gonna be one of your starting five pitchers. If you have to rely on Jason Vargas after extremely shitty year to be one of your starting five pitchers, then I'm sorry, you are not ready to compete. There were you could have, if you were ready to compete, in spite of Jason Vargas pitching shitty, and having his contract for the following year, and Dallas Keuchel being out there in free agency, in addition to Dallas Keuchel being a lefty, you go out there and fucking sign Dallas Keuchel. Sign him for 1 year. Fucking goddamn it, like he would have signed for a year, or you never throw a lot of money at him. Give him $30 million for 1 year, like fucking rather than bringing in Cano, who's probably making just as much, for 5 years. It's but that's just backwards ass thinking about the Mets. But I don't want to get too much into that. Like I'm just trying to illustrate the point that we weren't ready to compete. Signing DeGrom or extending DeGrom, as good as he is, and DeGrom, and I still think that like at this time, it's a good contract to a degree. I mean, or it's a fair contract. That it was a mistake because we if right now like it looks like we're not going to be ready to compete, or we're not ready to compete, we're not competing, we're sucking it up, we're losing as we speak 2-8 to the fucking division leading or to the people that are right on top of us in third place in the division, in the Phillies. We're nowhere near ready to compete. If fucking a sane thinking fan right now would say we're ready to rebuild, or most people would say we should tear this down. We can't tear a team down with contracts like Cano, with contracts like DeGrom. Sorry, DeGrom would have been a perfect player to trade right now. You could have fleeced the Yankees for some of the. I'm not just like relishing on like what the Yankees could have offered us. There's a ton of teams that have great prospects that would have been salivating over the chances of signing or acquiring somebody like DeGrom for even half a season. He's a pitcher that pitches deep into games. He's at like the age 29 or 30, like fucking it's somebody who's a perfect trade candidate. But right now, who knows what he's gonna give us, 2 years from now if he's gets injured, which is very likely because he pitches deep into games, and we're kind of fucked with that contract. Regardless of how he does, and that's like the Mets' MO and standard operating procedure, in which they say when they have a large contract like that, they don't say, "Oh well, fuck it, we made a mistake and we're gonna move on." And I'm not saying or hoping that this happens with DeGrom, but the Mets are the probably the team that does this the most, in that when they have a player signed, no matter how bad he does, David Wright is a good example of this, is that the main point of contention for the Mets is that player is signed and they're gonna run him out for the following year, and the Mets didn't sign a third baseman for years, and David Wright had a fucking a spinal cord that was probably the size of a baby's pinky. And the Mets would still like say that they were gonna run him out, and you wouldn't even Wright wouldn't begin or end the year on any of these years. But the Mets still kept insisting that Wright was our starting third baseman because they didn't want to go out and spend the money to get an additional third baseman. And we may be in that position with Robinson Cano. I'm pretty sure we will be. Like we may be in that same position with DeGrom if God forbid something happens to him. Like I would much rather the Mets don't go out spending money and going to a real rebuild. Any year. Like fucking name a year. Name any year. Like fucking, and I would have told you like the Mets should be rebuilding. But when you have a big contract like fucking Cano, the chances of you rebuilding are very in fact, I think the Mets are next year gonna go into the year signing another dumbass fucking almost premium player like fucking a la Jason Bay, like maybe the fourth or fifth best free agent prospect out there. Like fucking they'll overpay him and make it seem like, oh well, we'll spend the money like fucking and go into the year sucking and then being out of it in the month of May like we were this year. So yeah, the Mets made a mistake in re-signing DeGrom. And another reason too is that the prospect fucking cupboard is so barren with the fucking Mets. Like our best prospects right now are probably the guys we just drafted, and I didn't even want those guys. Like those aren't the players that I wanted to draft. Like fucking, and those are probably like our best prospects, bar none. Because we have like no prospects. We're a shitty team with a shitty selection of prospects or any help that's coming down the pipe. Anybody who's like close to helping the Mets is already like 26 years old. They're like the age, if not older, than like the young players of the Mets. I'm not gonna say than the average age of the Mets because we're a fucking old ass team. But yeah, I mean it's only bad news ahead for the Mets. But I already know what to expect. Fucking because I love this team. Unfortunately, I'm a battered bitch when it fucking comes to the Mets, man. Well, anyways, that's all for today. Fucking, I hope you enjoyed this video. Well, I didn't. Thanks.